Hi everybody, welcome to Acer's offices. It's so great to have you here. My name is Glenn, I'm from Acer, and today we're going to be talking to Jaco in a little bit more detail about what's going on in the consumer market, but also we're going to touch a little bit more about Microsoft Attach, and why M365, particularly cloud services, are going to play such a big part in the consumer dialogue in the future, and generally where things are going to. Jaco, thanks very much for joining us, bud.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you.
Cool, man. So I tell you what, let's kick off with this question. And it's kind of strange me asking you this question because I have my opinion on it and you have your opinion on it. But let's see if we can sort of find further ground on this one here. First things first, times are a little bit disruptive right now. There's shortages left, right, and center. As a distributor, how's Rectron finding it? And then I'll tell you a little bit about what we see as Acer. But how are you finding it, sort of a general overview on the shortages and where things are going to?
Yeah, look, Glenn, I think the market conditions we can never choose. We can only sort of guide our way through as best as we know it. I think the Rectron positioning has always been privileged in the sense that we can see sort of multinational pressure points before it becomes pressure points, because we've done a lot of component business for many, many years. So we kind of get a good idea of what happens before it happens. Once we started seeing this trend of the increased pricing happening, obviously all the markets moving into the AI space, we really, from a Rectron perspective, we just took a stocking position on brands wherever we could get stock, sort of taking initiative as to what products we see is going to be the ones that we need to have stock on. I think the Rectron positioning has always been quite substantial in the breadth customer base. So the smaller, the mom and pop shops, the smaller independent retailers, those are the guys we really want to try and service. I think one lesson we kind of learned through COVID as well is we want to try and have these guys available for as long as we possibly can. We don't deal with all the big, bulky type, retailer type environment guys, but we do deal with a lot of smaller guys that really adds value to the supply chain. So I think we were privileged in the sense that, number one, COVID was a bad worldwide experience, but from a stocking position perspective, we learned. And I think the component side of the business really gave us a good indicator as to what positioning to take and where sort of the shortages and price points are going to hit. So I think stocking-wise, we are okay. Price-wise, you cannot duck it. It's just the way of the world right now. It is going through a cycle where I think the world is determining at what point will the consumer stop buying. And I think that's still the upward trajectory that we're still currently going through. And I think whether it's going to stop or whether supply will then get better eventually, that will be a different point, which I'm sure we'll cover some of those aspects today. But I think the price point is definitely moving still in the upwards trajectory. It's not finished increasing in price if you can get stock. That's the other part, because it's three-dimensional. It's CPU, SSD, and memory. So that's the three majorly impacted ones.
So, I mean, there's so much in that statement. So let's try and unpack a little bit of this, and I think we can have a bit of a conversation around it. First and foremost, you mentioned COVID a couple of times. Is this the same as COVID? Because I don't think it is. Where do you see it being different to COVID? I mean, yeah, shortages is one word, but shortages during COVID were driven by people going and being shoved into home environments and said, go and work from home or go and learn from home. Or, you know, we do a lot of work in the education, and I remember teachers turning around and going, we just said to our kids, get online, whether it was cell phone, tablet, PC, desktop, didn't matter what it was, just get online. This is not the same. This is a different feeling to this. So this shortage is a different way. How are you seeing that shortage on your side?
So the biggest differentiator between what we're currently experiencing and COVID is COVID generated a demand into a different segment of the business. Like you just said, there's lots of offices that still had desktops that they were working in and then had to get the guys working from a remote perspective. So it created a lot of demand there. Also what happened is this was a global demand that was generated. What that then meant was South Africa as a country, we are kind of very small in the global.
Yeah, we're like a peanut in a very big salad.
In a very big salad. And from a supply perspective, South Africa got starved of stock because the bigger countries with bigger cash flows, bigger monies, they could purchase a lot more of that stock.
We also saw from an Acer point of view just on that supply, and I think we're going to see something very similar happening maybe, well, depending on how you sort of want to play this one out. We saw during COVID, like for example with Acer, is that the demand, for example, on devices for education got a bigger allocation of smaller CPUs. And we're seeing that now. I mean, I've got smaller CPUs, but the allocation in terms of our prediction and our production lines, should I say, are generally dedicated more to the education ruggedized devices, because you only have so much in that market. You drop the education market, kids stop learning. So you've got to make sure you take care of that. You'll see some of the other guys, I think, where they'll allocate to, they might have a heavy focus on gaming, so they'll sort of go and buy up and sort of focus. So you almost, from a vendor point of view, you got to, everybody's going to have a little bit of a, we've got good stock on our 5 on the Acer, but maybe we got a little bit more on the Ryzen, for example, on one of our competitors, just simply because everybody. So I think the point that I'm making, which is quite important to everybody, is that don't think that because one brand has got processors and CPUs on one, that everybody's got it, because it gets
100%.
allocated differently. You know, we allocate and we prioritize based on where we can get the right project codes and things like that as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a COVID side of things. So, Tori, you were saying?
Yeah, so we can clearly see the demand generation this time around is not the same as COVID, because this is not to try and get guys to work from home and have devices available. This is now trying to scoop up product that's still within the CapEx budget that was allocated. Because there's risks in the guys not spending those budgets. The budgets will not get renewed, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff around that. But also you're seeing that sort of race towards grabbing as much of the stock as I can, but also the big part of the market's not really saying that this is not going to stop very soon. You know, market was thinking maybe this is a short little blimp and it will get over that. And you can see the trend is still, like I said earlier, the price trend is still on the upward trend. And I think a lot of the customer bases was waiting this out and kind of lost the opportunity in where they could have benefited from the price. Now that the new pricing is starting to filter in and still going up, the guys have lost that opportunity. And I think where, you know, the normal old saying, if one loses, the other one gains, in this opportunity, a lot of the guys were potentially looking at where they had CapEx budgets now moving to OpEx. You know, moving stuff to where they can do rentals again. Something that sort of kind of flatlined a couple of years ago, that's completely made a comeback back on the board. I think value-added product again, like a couple of the OEM brands that used to be out there in retailers, is now obviously making a little bit of a comeback in that space, because the consumer still has an affordability challenge. That was not just an allocation of the product challenge, it's actually an affordability challenge. I think that's the biggest issue we're heading towards right now, not just the shortages, but the way the pricing is going when there isn't a shortage, and if the guys are going to be able to afford that long term.
Or justify it.
Or justify it. And I think, you know, the market's kind of reaching a point to a certain degree where a consumer is making the decision, will I actually spend that? And I think, you know, I tell my team all the time, you know, try and think like a consumer. If you were going to go online and make a purchase, would you still make that purchase? If your answer is still yes, then that means there's probably still a percentage out there of customers that will still do that. If your answer is no, it kind of means there's a lot more customers that will go into that no sort of trend. And at what point do we reduce the order intakes? Do we reduce the orders that we're ordering? Or do we stop that at all? Or do we cherry pick exactly like you were saying? We're seeing already some of our multinational brands have exactly the same issue. They've got enough SSD, they've got enough memory, but they don't have enough CPU to allocate.
Yes, 100%.
Or they've got small core CPU, but they don't have high. You know, there's already those type of shortages are definitely happening. And when they have all three of those and they wanted to go the gaming route, they've got the RTX problems as well from that perspective. So the gaming side is under pressure. Not just from a supply point of view, but also substantial increases going into that space, which is making the consumer, I think, twice. You know, should I buy it right now? Should I wait? How long do I wait? Do I want to wait? And I think kind of the market's moving towards a place where you kind of have that space now where a customer will say, I have to have this device because I've got a new employee starting and I need him to be active, or her for that matter. Or is it something I can sweat that little bit longer? I think there's a lot of the older devices that's already made, you know, come out of the back of the shelves and put back into environments because it's just an affordability thing. I can't afford to roll out new devices now. And I think it is a very interesting market segment that we're in right now, and I don't think anybody's got a very clear view and answer as to what the next steps are going to be and how the consumer will react.
So let's unpack that a little bit as well, because you made the statement is why, why should the customer might be asking themselves, why should I buy? Okay, and we're going to separate the commercial side, because the commercial guys, they're just going to write it off to the tax over 3 years, and they'll get their money back, and they've got different sets of problems. So CapEx aside and OpEx aside, let's talk consumer here, and let's sort of focus there. Why would a consumer, let's say now we now enter the second half of this year, prices are 30% higher. In fact, from what we are seeing in some instances, you take a Celeron, a dual core Celeron, what you were paying in one of the retailers for 4,999, I think the projection is 6,999 now. Some of them that you were at 5,999, you're probably hitting 8,999 on the N150 and the N150, the N355. We're seeing going over 10 grand, which is the so-called, and I hate using it, but the old i3 comparison is that it's going to go there. I say that because we really do need to get to know our chips better, because the N150 and the N330 chipsets that are coming out from Intel, for example, are substantially better. In fact, don't even call the N150 a Celeron. It's not. It's a quad core where that's there. Now I say that because we need to get people's understanding right that if you start looking at the specification of an N150 8 gig 256 at 8,999, actually it's not a bad deal, because you were buying that, or you were buying an i3 version of that at 6,799. Or you were buying a Ryzen 5, Ryzen 3 at those sort of price points. So yes, there's a movement up, but if you start understanding the tech, there is a reason to keep buying PCs in the consumer sub 10 grand mark. When we go over the 10 grand mark, there's substantially better quality product in terms of your system on chip technology that's coming out. So I think there's a reason for people to keep buying computers. I really do. I do think that at the entry level, that's a different conversation, because they're your first time buyer. Maybe they're going to stall and go a little bit to tablets and have a look at what happens around the tablet, the entry level side. So I think that from an insurance replacement point of view, a good example of that, we need to understand our technology a little bit different, because the technology has shifted quietly. I think we as South Africans have belabored the i3 and the Celeron conversation a little bit too long. We still think that anything that is a N100 or N150 is it's not a Celeron replacement. It's literally double the processing power and equivalent to a 12th gen i3. So I think that that's something that we as sort of retailers selling to consumers, whether it's for education or for use, need to sort of really take note of, and why we shouldn't be scared to still embark on carrying PCs in our business, because otherwise, if consumers are going to be scared to buy PCs, I think resellers are going to be scared as well. But I do think that there's sort of a shift in it. Let's talk a little bit about the gaming side of things. How do you think the gaming side is impact? Because there we're seeing quadruple whammy, because you're not talking about, yes, you do have the guys who are first-time gamers who used to have 8 gig 512 with maybe a 2050 graphics card. But for the real gamers, they're on the high end. They're getting whacked on a 4050 or 5070 graphics card, where it was 20 grand, it's now 40 grand, for example, or whatever the latest price is. Your 16 gig of RAM, you want to upgrade that to 32, you're in for another 5-10 grand. So you're basically going to pay double for a PC there. Do you see that sort of shifting a little bit, where people are going to stop buying, or do you see them maybe accessorizing a little bit more, or how do you see that one playing out?
So I've sort of classified it in 3 segments. So you've got your affordability guy. That's the guy that saved up to get to the 4,999 price point. He can't get there right now because it's moved to 6,999. He's just going to try and keep saving till he eventually gets there, or he's going to try and search for product that is actually fitting the budget because he needs that device right now. The middle segment, I think, is probably the biggest. What percentage that is really the one we're trying to determine right now. That middle segment is really core business facility. That's the guy that must have the device, wants the device, and has made a decision. He's not going to buy the entry level. He's moved up in the stack already to say, I'm going to buy this device because it's a 3 to 5 year device for me. not necessarily a once a year device I'm going to try and swap out. And to answer the gaming question, I can see that trend heading in the gaming side, where the gaming guys are making one or two decisions. It's either like, I know this pressure is going to be there on the price point, so do I need it right now, or can I hold on a little longer? Because luckily, in their case, if they want the latest and greatest RTX 50 series was released last year already, there is no changes coming through this year, so there's no real shift driving that demand. But what we are seeing the guys are looking for is, instead of me becoming 16 gig as entry level, it's now 32 gig and 64 gig, and a lot of 128 gigs in the market requests coming through. So the guys are kind of like wanting to buy a 3 to 5 year product rather than not buying at all. I think the difficult part us as a distributor is at what percentage does that remain? How many of the guys will take? How many guys will make the decision not to necessarily buy that right now? But we're definitely seeing the buying patterns hasn't stopped. The guys are just going up in the stack, buying more performance, better devices, wanting to buy the device for a longer period of time. I think for the environments that they want to work in, because work by day, game by night is a big thing that's happened in the industry. I think one other benefit is we'll always have in South Africa, love the country, but it is insurance replacements. It's always going to be there. Devices do break. I think failures on devices are still there. So that sort of all fits into that middle sort of segment I was referring to earlier. So I can definitely see the trend in all categories, from entry level all the way to the top end space. Everybody is still spending. It's just how much they prepare to spend and what's their spec requirement that they want. But you can see the trend looking for devices that they're going to have for longer.
And I think that's where, particularly our resellers and our retailers out there sort of have a grasp as to who their customers are. If you're at the entry level cycle of things, it's going to be tough. Maybe you've got to be looking for older generation Ryzen 3s as your starting point and not want to move up the stack too quickly. Because there's a lot of older gen that are starting to be made available on the market. And we're seeing that even with our launch of our entry-level brand that we're going to be doing now in the coming months, coming weeks actually. It's already starting to hit stores. But what we're seeing though is that we're seeing the availability of pockets of those entry-level CPUs, be it a 3rd gen Ryzen 3. Now, yes, of course we want a 7th gen at the right price point, but if you can get the 3rd gen at an affordable price point, it's still better than an N4 or 4500 Celeron, for example. You're still getting better performance and things like that. These are new chips that have been stockpiled because they ran out of favor and ran out of fashion a couple of years ago when the new gen, so they get stockpiled and then they get released onto the market, which is great because it is there. But I don't think that customers need to be scared of those processors. Don't be scared of older generation processors. And if you're sitting with older generation processors, don't be scared about those. Just get to know your customer and what processor fits them, because there are still products available for them. So I've seen quotations about RAM apocalypse, and I've heard like death and doom. I think we'd be stupid to not say there's going to be a slowdown. Be stupid to not think that people are going to be affected where they turn around and go, I can't afford that. But I also think that it's a bit dystopian to turn around and go, the industry is going to collapse because of the shortage. Because the technology is moving. I personally, and I know you and I have had a bit of a chat around this, I believe that the shortage is not going to be solved by making more RAM, CPU, and that. I believe that what we're going to see is we'll see new technologies emerging and new behavior patterns emerging that will encourage the adoption. Maybe we won't see people justifying an i5 or an Ultra 5, a Core 5 or an Ultra 5. Maybe in their usage they start understanding that what they need is something a little bit more moderate. Do you really need, or should I say, does your customer, when you're having that conversation, really need it? And I think this is where Microsoft with their M365 Online really has shaken the world. And their competitors are doing similar sort of stuff. But the fact that if you know that 96% of users predominantly use web apps in their function of a daily basis, that's including businesses.
Yeah.
Now, if you're using web apps, and what you really need is you need a bloody good router. You need a good connection. You need stable connection, and because all the processing power happens in the cloud. So now all of a sudden you start going, well, do I really need to have an Ultra 7 in my small business, or my Ultra 7 for my kid who's studying? The reality is that when you're looking at the usage and the shift of the software into the cloud and the processing power, which is why there's a shortage, because it's all sitting in the data centers, and you see Microsoft 365 from an Office suite point of view, which, if I'm not mistaken, they offer the cloud version basically for free. If it's a small cost, isn't it?
It's a small cost.
Small cost. But if you want the rest of it, you pay a slight fee, whatever it happens to be. The point is that cloud-based services will make computers more affordable, because you don't need heavy antivirus software that you would need if everything was sitting on your computer. You don't need the storage. You don't need 512 or 2 gigs or 3 gigs of storage, because heck, you just buy, 1 terabyte in the cloud or whatever you want, So you don't need all of those things. Now what you need is you need a PC that looks good, has really good battery life. That's going to be very important. And also has good connectivity, I think Wi-Fi 5 versus Wi-Fi 6 has started to become more of a conversation, or should be more of a conversation topic than whether you've got DDR5 or DDR4 in your unit. Because at the end of the day, your connectivity becomes a big player in it. And I think that if you can function in an online Microsoft Office environment, which arguably 96% of the consumers and 96% of businesses, it can live in the cloud. They don't need everything on device. But we need to make that shift in behavior. We've done it in streaming. When you look at the number of streaming boxes that are coming on versus DSTV decoders, where we go to satellites, or we have this, and we look at some of the other tech, we're doing it in other areas. Why are we not doing it in computers? Why do you think?
Yeah, I think for too long the industry had a story that was narrated by what retailers' shelves allowed them to carry. Because there's space constraints. Then we saw the shift when online platforms became available, where that had a complete opposite kind of effect to the consumer, because the consumer could walk into a store and physically see what he wanted, but it was limited to what the shelf space allowed inside those stores. Online then went and blew that up entirely. Now I've got way too many choices. Now I'm not sure. So I think what is happening now is exactly that. The affordability issue that's happening is it's causing users to now do more research before they purchase. Because of online, they've got a lot more freedom to go choose product from there. Retailers are also still there from a walk-in perspective to see what the technology is and what the devices look like. But I think now the consumer will start doing more research. Again, that Wi-Fi 5 versus Wi-Fi 6 versus Wi-Fi 7 that's coming now. That's the infrastructure that guys will have better performance at. No CPU kind of ever has been utilized to its full capacity. It's the layers of the other products that go inside there that makes the user experience better. And I think now for the first time, because a consumer can't afford to pay 10 grand for a 5 grand device, it's now going to make him look at why is it 10 grand, what's inside there versus what is the 15 grand product got versus the 10 grand product, and is really nitpicking on the specs and looking at exactly what is my usability, what do I need. If I think about friends and family, every time they phone me to say, I need a device, my first question always is, what's your budget?
And what are you going to use it for?
And what are you going to use it for?
Absolutely.
If you're going to use it as a streaming device, I'm not going to give you a 60 grand gaming device.
100%.
But if understanding what those user functions are going to be on the device will determine. A lot of customers, for example, they'll want to game at night and work during the day. Some guys just want the best performance on the device, and they want to do, they take a lot of photos and editing, and they need the right device for that. Then obviously the 5 grand product's not going to suit that. So I think for the first time, the narrated story that the industry could only tell consumers based on what shelf space was, or based on list everything and then confusing the customer, I think now the consumer has a real opportunity to look into detail and say, what is it that I need? How can I use that? And once I've determined my device, what does the software like Microsoft and all of those type of add-on products, what do I need? What does that software require in order for me to get the best usability? So now I'm counting the cents because I'm not just spending 10 grand because I have it. It's now looking at that 10 grand and getting the best product I can fit in that.
It's quite an interesting one because I think that, and I don't want to be condescending to our industry because I'm part of it and we're part of the solution as well as part of the problem. But I think if we look back, for the last 25 odd years, our technology is basically, it's very, very, very simple. Have your CP stack between, back in a 386 and a 486 and whatever it happened to be. Then we moved to Atom and Celeron, PQC, i3, i5 and i7, and then i9 came in the mix. I mean, let's not talk about AMD, because AMD, you had the E1, E2, then you had the, what was the other one?
A9s,
Yeah,
A4s,
A9s, A10s,
A2s.
and then you saw to the newer ones, which was discovered, Athlone. Then you had the Athlone Silver, Black, you kind of got like, there were so many different stacks and packs, etc., etc. So we used to differentiate based on CPU. Then we started moving to memory, but memory was always only 2 gigs.
Yeah.
We only needed 2 gigs. 2 gigs was enough. And then along came Office Windows 10, and all of a sudden 2 gigs kind of stuttered a little bit, mainly because of that, and we could get away with, and then 32 gigs wasn't enough, and basically we differentiate on those 3 major components. Of course, cosmetic was preference. So let's put cosmetic aside, because there's still some really, really sexy devices out there that I'd buy down just to have that device because it looks good on my desk. I mean, that'll always be there. In fact, I think that we're actually going to see a growth in that, but that's a different conversation. But if you look at those 3, now we have to start considering application and usage in the conversation. So when a customer comes in and they want to do it, and they're coming in and you're saying to them, just take schools, for example. You've got a parent coming in with a kid, and they're saying, my kid's got a letter, they have to have a computer for school. Well, the first question you should ask is what grade you're in, what applications you're going to do, are you doing coding and robotics, are you doing this, are you doing that? Because all of those will have a material effect on what computer you want to sell. Because if you try and sell them an i5, they're going to go, there's no way I'm putting if you try and sell a Core 5, keep these things right, they'll try and sell a Core 5 or Core 3, they're going to turn around and they're going to go, the new Core 3, and they're going to go, how do I justify putting 15 grand PC in the hands of an 8, 10-year-old?
Yeah.
So now you start asking those questions, and you've got to start doing that. So the salespeople on the floors and the resellers and the retailers and anybody dealing with consumers as an end use, if you're seeing consumer face to face, I think we kind of all need to go back to school a little bit and realize that our industry has shifted quite radically, where the device as an edge device is just a very, very small component of the ecosystem, where it basically was 100% of what the decision making. If the CPU was right, if the RAM was right, if the storage was right, hey, bachat, there we go, we're ready to rock and roll. Now, we have to bring all the different software in and the applications and all of that, and we really need to know our stuff, because otherwise we are going to sell somebody something which is too expensive and they're going to walk out the door, or we're going to do something which is even worse, sell them something on the entry side and they're going to walk back in the door with a return. So you kind of got to get that right in terms of that. And in-store execution, you touched on it as well. In-store execution has to change. The conversation at the point of contact has to start changing, because as an industry, vendors, distributors, resellers, retailers alike, we have a responsibility to sell the right product to the customer. It was easy when, if you made a mistake, you sold them up on an R5, great. It wasn't going to break the bank. Now, you're talking a 5 grand shift between a Core 3, Core 5 coming through, the new Core 3 that are coming through. So it's a radical change. I mean, there's more responsibility coming through, but I do think that comes opportunity, because if we're competing in an online world, the only way to differentiate is through a better experience for our customers. So, I personally believe that if your store or if your point of experience doesn't have fast Wi-Fi, to be able to demonstrate how great Office 365 or Windows in the cloud is, or how you can develop and design a PowerPoint using a Copilot AI to actually sort of bring everything in, how the Copilot AI as a large language model works so effectively with connectivity and the experience and that. If you don't have decent Wi-Fi at your point of contact, you're not going to be able to justify why they must buy it, because then they're going to walk out with the seller and go, but it all looks the same because they started up the same. Yeah, because there's nothing on it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we also need to take into consideration. Because I know it's a conversation I have with the big retailers. You know, if I walk into your store, do you have fast Wi-Fi that allows us to demonstrate the applications of the computer? Because gone are the days where we're only looking at the computer in terms of how it looks and what the specs and speeds and feeds look like on a piece of paper.
I think the word you used was responsibility. And I think that is such a good word to use in this current day and age of our industry. I think, you know, everybody's got a responsibility to make sure that we educating the consumer in his buying decision. And it's not all about just shoving the stock down their throats. It's all about how do we get them to buy the right products. We know that the affordability, as an example, is under major pressure from every consumer, every business, any small business. Everybody's feeling the pinch. And I think there's lots of opportunities and platforms out there. You know, what are you guys in Acer's world doing towards this price increases and affordability issues that the customers are experiencing?
Well, we've worked quite nicely, I think, with our distributors and particularly with you guys in Charity in terms of putting a range together to preempt the wave. Unfortunately, in some instances, that just keeps getting knocked back because of shortages, but I think we're sort of coming right there. We have shifted to ensure that we're focusing all support on sort of the mid-end. I think you spoke a little bit earlier about maybe we need to sort of ignore the bottom end, or not ignore, you didn't use the word ignore, but you know, where do we position ourselves? You know, we only have so much money to spend when it comes to support, and I think that it's more important right now that we're supporting that middle cluster of products, almost like that mainstream product. What we've also done as well, because we know shortages are rife, and we're going to have patches and batches of stock. So we've now launched our Acer X portal, where the guys can go on, the Ignite portal, and our resellers can go on and you can see exactly what stock is in country, and you can get an idea whether it's great. And then they can buy everything that's there, whether it's sitting with you or with another distributor. You can buy it all through Rectron. You know, there's no need for you to go and open up other accounts. Everything that you're sitting there. So if you're needing a once-off on a projector, for example, so what we've actually done is we've worked to try and marketplace the stock management as well. So availability is a very, very key component to actually fight price hikes. You know, it's a very, very important, operationally, it's such an important one. Because there are pockets of stock out there where somebody might be sitting with 3 of something which they can't move, or that's been sitting with it for a while, but your customer is looking for it and wants to buy it through you. So we've done that. The Ignite program and the Ignite rewards are also a really big thing, which does help when you're not only, it's not geared to be an incentive per se, whilst it can be used in that way, but it's actually meant as a support structure. It says if we're doing promotional clearance, instead of us going and saying we're going to offer a different incentive on those rewards for the end user, what we do is that we work with the resellers to say, we've got the small pocket of stock, we'll support it through the rewards program. So it just balances it out in between in terms of that. Then I mentioned a little bit earlier, one of the projects which we're going to be launching on is we're going to be bringing in one of our a sub-brand. So like we've got Nitro and we've got Predator, we've got Aspire, TravelMate, Extensa. We've got a sub-brand called E10, which was launched about 3 years ago globally, because what we experienced here in Africa was experienced in other areas, particularly India, believe it or not, it kind of almost goes without saying, where the market, very similar market trends to us, where the customers were going, the technology is a little bit too fast for what I'm prepared to pay. And that was also accelerated now with the shortages. We opted as early as 18 months ago, because we knew the shortages were going to start coming. We didn't know how bad it was going to be. To look at that brand, and that will become available through Rectron in the second half of the year. And that's only because right now we've launched it through the mass retailers simply because of the shortages and where we can, because we need to plug gaps. But that will expand, and I think we've spoken about some of the projects we want to work with you guys on those products to attack or to provide solutions in those areas which kind of are difficult with Acer to get to those price points. So very, very briefly, we do use older CPUs. So Acer is only doing 13th gen and above that now. We do have some 12th gen, but we may pick up a batch of, for example, some i5 11th gen or 12th gen on desktop that we believe are at a good enough price that can come in. And we'll do that under that brand. Because Acer will always be the best, is yet to come. We'll always be the latest technology. Our brand CI doesn't allow us to go too far backwards. But E10 will create that bit of a gap. So you will start seeing that coming out. It is an Acer product. It's supported by Acer. It's manufactured in our factories. The only difference is that we do tend to use older CPUs to make it more affordable.
Yeah.
Older generations, not second-hand or used.
Yeah.
Those, yeah.
Yeah, I think we are really, from a distribution perspective, what I've enjoyed the most about this DX or, the Acer X program was, us as a distributor, we have hard battles to fight. And like I said earlier, I classified the product in sort of like 3 tiers. For long, we went through a sort of breadth campaign. We've done this game for over 20 years now. And for long, colors started making comebacks, red, pink, blue. All of them eventually just fell away again because the market can't consume breadth. It's never done well on the number of lines. And onliners have this challenge all the time. There's too much choice for customers. And where I like the DX is it's giving us an opportunity to do breadth and depth at the same time.
Yes.
So our distribution channel, we've made a very specific stocking position as to what we want our channel customers to be able to consume based on the knowledge that we've seen from their sellouts and how they upgrade devices, and we use all that information to do that. And to get the breadth, the DX program is really assisting with that. So it's giving us the coverage in the range without us having to order on every one of those products because we've got access to them.
I was looking at, we were doing some numbers. We were talking earlier about what is the percentage of the middle market and entry market and everything else again. So we were doing some numbers, which we'll dig into a lot more on Wednesday, I think, when we sit with the guys and we do our presentation. But just to sort of give a viewpoint as to where the market is moving, and we're looking at that mid to higher end, where if you have a look at where the market is positioned, before we used to enjoy around about 42% of our market in that sub 12,000 Rand mark of the ranges that we carried. That's going to drop probably to 12 or 13% of our number of SKUs under Acer brand that will fit in there. It's tiny. The rest go up the stack. The problem is the stack above the 12 grand mark is only 30% or 28% of the total market, where everybody has got a range and a breadth of products which is there. So that's why, and to your point, is working capital is finite. You can only carry so much stock. And I think what sometimes people don't realize is that when you place an order with any vendor, it's production, it's shipping, it's clearing. I mean, that cycle can take 90, 120 days. And if you get it wrong, you only find out 60 days afterwards when it starts aging that you made the wrong call on the color pink instead of making the call there. So you guys with the vendors, all vendors, by the way, we're all deal with this. We're looking at the market 7 months down the line, trying to predict at least, by the way, 7 months down the line. And when the order is placed with the vendor, your commitment is to pay us in 7 or 8 months' time when this whole cycle sort of lives out. So you kind of got to get it right, and that's why working capital is finite. Yeah. Do you see within the distributors, because we do see it within retailers, I think we're going to see a little bit of a Paretoing system happening where guys are going to start dropping, so shelves will go a little bit emptier, which is okay, by the way, because it's temporary. Just don't make your shelf space smaller because of where we are right now. That'll be a little bit crazy. But do you see Rectron Paretoing your range a little bit to accommodate this massive push with price points going over that price point mark, where you're going to turn around and you're going to say, with respect to myself, with respect to Acer, I'm not going to carry that in Acer. I'm going to carry that in a different brand simply because I only have so many dollars to spend.
We definitely, and again, to your point as well, we 7, 8, 9 months ahead of where we are sitting here right now, trying to establish what is the market going to be consuming. We won't stop entry level completely because it becomes an affordability thing. What we're doing is we've just tried and reduced that range and not stock it on all multinational. Choose the best out of them from a pricing perspective, and we'll have a couple of hundred there. Looking at the core mid-series space, There we've taken a stocking position, but also again try and make sure that the customer can make the decision into what brand he wants to buy, but also get him the best value as a choice. Because customers still, what we've learned a couple of years ago already is customers don't like us choosing for them. They want to have the option of making that decision. So whether they want a 16 gig and a 32 gig, either which way they'll purchase whatever they feel they need to purchase. But having that range, but sort of reducing that, but making sure we've got the right stocking position from that point of view. So we're going into more of a depth campaign with some of the products. So some of the products we've taken higher stocking positions on because we believe it's safer product to have for longer periods of time. We've also had to plateau our working capital models from that perspective. So when a brand's working capital model puts the brand under pressure as well as Rectron under pressure, and another brand has better working capital facilities, we had to make those decisions and say, this is a bit more towards the depth campaign than the breadth campaign. We'll always still support all our brands from a Rectron perspective.
Of course.
Have to. But we had to make hard decisions inside there to make sure we try and predict what we think the customer is going to be consuming, and then trying to figure out what the magic number is. You know, the market's talking about 15% reduction in unit sales. Personally, my gut feel says it will be more than that. I think it will be more than that based on which sort of market segment you're targeting. I think consumer and retail space, I think will feel the pinch first, and I think they're already kind of feeling that pressure already. Corporate space is kind of different, but when we're talking about consumer products, I think it's going to be a very interesting juggling act to figure out what is the magic number that we're going to keep. We're always going to try and want to keep the range, but which product we go deep in, meaning we carry more of one part number or two part numbers rather than carrying 12, 15 or 20 part numbers like we used to do in the old days. I think it's going to be difficult, and at the same time trying to balance the working capital that is going to be under pressure, because the stocking position we're taking will need to be in such a way managed through the system as well, because once we've purchased that stock, we've paid the vendor before we've even sold all the stock. So we're going to need to find that very close balance from that perspective. But I think on my side, Martin and I, we actually chat every day. We try and look at as much information as we can see in the markets, but we don't let that determine our chain of thought. We actually look at our sellout reports every single day. That's how we determine if the 8 gig outsold the 16 gig, or if we're seeing the 8 gigs outsold the 16 gig, but it had an 8 gig upgrade. That's how we kind of determine what our products are. Because the vendor reports, as an example, you can't see if it's gone out as a 16 gig. You can only see you've sold me an 8 gig, I sold you 8 gig. Inside our organization, we can see the upgrades that's happening. We can see the number of attach that's coming through from that perspective. And that's always a good indicator of how we use information as to what stocking positions we take. And again, we have to do that 6, 8, 9 months in advance. We don't always get it right because the market sometimes doesn't shift. It just moves. It literally jumped from 16 gig to 32 gig. Will it jump back to 8 because it's fitting a certain capex budget, or are the guys going to stick to their guns and say, I'm paying for 32 gig because I want this device at 32 gig? That's the little balancing act on top of all the working capital, on top of all the vendors, and the 7, 8, 9 months in advance we got to try and predict is the tricky part.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult for people to go from 16 back to 8. It may be just as difficult to go from 16 to 32 from justifying to the missus why you need to do it. But I think that's there. I just want to touch on that point from an industry, a vendor point of view. Make sure you register your warranty if you're doing an upgrade. Make sure that you've registered all of that, because you don't want to have a comeback from the vendor going, you didn't register the warranty, and you then fall out of space. So those are like sort of little things that are important as well, because we are going to be upgrading more. And make sure that you don't always opt, because I know that the other side of it as well is that there's a temptation to buy maybe, let's say, an 8 gig Aspire Go from you guys, right? And take it and go, well, I can buy off online another 8 gigs of RAM, and then I sort of slot it in and thinking I'm going to get 16, and then the computer goes, it doesn't work. Because just because it's an SSD and it might technically supposed to fit, there's some real, I'm going to use the right word, nice word, starts with a C and it ends with rubbish. But there's some really rubbish SSD that the guys are sort of dumping out there at great prices, and you might feel the temptation. I mean, what does an extra 8 gigs of RAM cost if you're going with your better quality, the brands that you carry?
Dealer price ex VAT, you're looking at 1899 to 2000, so you can kind of look at about 24, 2999 sort of retail type price points.
So anything that is like 1500 is,
be careful.
As I say, it's a sneaky lekker nie.
Yeah.
Something's not right there. We need to be very, very careful. I'm not saying it's not available.
Yeah.
I'm just saying very, very, very careful, because what a lot of people don't realize is that if you upgrade theirs on an Acer unit, and I'm sure a lot of the vendors operate the same way, but if you buy 8 gig, you go to the market, buy another 8 gigs of RAM, slot it in yourself, and it doesn't work, you basically, if there's anything, whilst the hardware won't be void from warranty because it's still there, the functionality of the software, the firmware, it does become a chargeable repair, because we look at it and go, it wasn't upgraded through the right path.
Yeah.
So it has to be upgraded through a reputable source. So my recommendation is do it at source, pay a little bit extra from the likes of the Rectron.
100% agree. I think we touched on the point earlier as well. Consumers will do a lot more research now before they make the purchasing decision. This will form exactly part of that. Look at your product's warranty before you make the purchasing decision.
And compatibility.
And compatibility. Do not just think that your distributor is overcharging you. It is product that's been tried and tested. It's the reason we've stuck with those brands. You are going to find cheaper stuff out there. Be cautious of them. I'm not saying they're not going to work. I'm saying it could have implications on the device that you are putting it into that could not be compatible, because the reason that distributor products are generally, I wouldn't necessarily say higher price, but it's tried and tested product that has gone through all the brand testing and certification to make sure it works with those devices.
Well, it's compliant
It's
price.
compliant price.
Yeah, because I think what a lot of people also don't realize, particularly now when we are in these situations where I had a 16, I can afford an 8, I'm just going to buy an 8 and I'm going to just buy a cheap module and plug it in, is that it might work in the first 6 months, but the moment there's a firmware upgrade, then you start dealing with other issues that come through. Because again, I want to come back, that's a chargeable repair. Because you're bringing back a device to me that you bought in 8 gigs, you've now modified it effectively, which it can do if done correctly, but you bug it up, now it's out of warranty.
Now it's costly.
So from a reseller point of view, we just need to be very, very aware that we got these complicated. Let me give you an example. So I picked it up the other day with my guys. We were sitting down. We offer 3-year warranties on our TravelMate. If we do an exchange, our policy says we exchange at the invoice price, not at the replacement price. So imagine now you're dealing with 1,500 Rand buying gap. Now we've put a policy and a process in place to deal with this, because to your point, we're looking 8, 12, 14 months down the line. What if? But that's the granular level. When you sell a device and somebody slots something in, don't come back and fight with the disty or the vendor because they've gone and made a modification. We've thought of these things, which is why we sort of work these things through. So, we've got to be, as vendors and disties, living 12 months in advance for the what-ifs that happen. And we just want to encourage the retailers and the resellers and even the consumers, if they get to hear of this, to just be aware that we're getting into complicated times.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting, and we can look at devices in isolation. I come back to we used to look at the 3 components and how sexy it looked. There's so much more that needs to be taken into consideration. Don't fall into the trap of thinking you can do it alone, because with PCs, my learnings over the last couple of years, very, very seldom do you see the problem occur when you send the guy out of your shop. It's when they come back 8 months later, 9 months down the line, and they go, oh, that upgrade didn't quite do what it needed to do, and it must be there. It comes in for diagnosis. Our guys there, because our technicians are highly skilled, they get charged. They charge us by the hour in many instances. They get paid. If they pick up that's there, somebody's got to recover the cost. And because you didn't follow the right process and you thought you were saving, could end up costing you an extra 1,500 Rand in a warranty repair down the line that you
Yeah.
never took into consideration.
Yeah, I think the magic word is the reliable support. I think it's doing the research. Don't be afraid to use product like Copilot. Go and do the research and see what Copilot does for you. Let it give you a summarized version before you make the buying decision, and just go back to your trusted advisors, which is 99% of the time is going to be your distributor of choice. It's just because this is what we do to the supply chain. This is what our job in the supply chain is. We complement the supply chain by having the product in country, and we complement the supply chain by having the resource there to help you through the product stack that you need to purchase, help you through the buying decision that you have to make. I think that with our vendors is really the key message we're going to have to get done.
So this conversation was a very practical conversation, very, very practical. We've got to talk about AI. We've got to talk about the impact of AI. We've got to give you a view of where things are going to, not as only as Acer, but I'm sure other, from a retail point of view, where consumers are going to. What is cloud and all of that going to actually impact, etc. But we're not going to do that now, because otherwise we're going to be waffling and our pizza's going to get cold. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick it up on Wednesday. So if the guys want to know more, come to the Microsoft Acer event that's happening on Wednesday at Serengeti. We're gonna touch on things. What I would encourage you to do is bring your questions. Do a bit of research. Bring some questions. Not that we have all the answers, but we do know how to use Copilot effectively to find them for you, and we can maybe contextualize the answers and give you a little bit more insight. But make sure you've signed up. Make sure you enjoy and come and enjoy yourself. Bring your techies. We are going to end off with a game of paddle just to see who's the best. Golf takes too long nowadays. Jaco, thanks very much for coming through to Acer's office. Your input is invaluable. One day we'll get Martin here, but then I think it'll become an hour and a half session of unpacking the nuances, because we do live in the detail. And I think a lot of the time people don't realize that when that price list has gone out, the thinking and everything that goes into it. I mean, I know you and I sit sometimes and we go through it and we fight, literally getting to screams and shouts about where we're going to, etc., etc. We love each other, we hug each other, but at the end of the day, what it's all about is saying we are responsible within our organizations to see where around 3 or 4 corners. And whilst it's become harder, we do have the luxury of smart people who have been through this. Yes, we're going to make wrong calls, but we're going to do the best and help everybody navigate. Both our lines and your lines will always be open to people to answer questions. So if they just want advice, I'm sure you don't mind them picking up the phone and phoning. We don't. I have those calls quite regularly as well. Where do we see it going? How do we formulate? How do we forecast? Where's it going to? Sometimes the answers are, let me think about it and get back to you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks a lot. See you guys on Wednesday, Serengeti. I think we kick off at 2 o'clock. That's right. I'm getting the thumbs up from the team around the table. And then we'll go on and enjoy ourselves.